But anyway, I mean, I probably should repeat some of that so we can have it on the video, though. Because this question is coming up more and more often of the whole point of the project is that you use libraries and you write reports, so you learn how libraries work. This is something, I've said this many times throughout the semester, right? Can I get some backup on that one? The intent of the project is that it complements the homework by being something different. If I was just having you write homework code, then it's just more homework. And there's no reason for that project to exist. The point of the project is that you use libraries like you're going to use after this class. You're never going to read from a TCP socket again after 312. After you submit homework 4, you will probably never touch a TCP socket directly ever again. You're going to connect to it through libraries. That's how you're going to use things. You're going to use web frameworks. You're going to use Flask and Django and Express and all these libraries that are out there for us. So the project is supposed to give you experience using those libraries. And then the reports are so you actually understand what those libraries are doing for you. I want to empower you to know when you're using those libraries, know what those libraries are doing because you did the same thing on your homework. You did the same thing those libraries are doing. And when you use that library, you understand what it's doing because you dug through the code and actually found the code that looks like your homework code. And you realize that, wow, this library is just my homework with a whole bunch of crap piled on top of it. That's really just, I say crap, but I use that tongue-in-cheek, of course. A lot of organization around it. It's a very organized project, but underneath it all, it's just your homework code. They're doing the same exact thing. So when you go out there and, for the project, maybe you use Flask, and you learn that Flask is just doing the same thing as your homework, just a lot fancier. And then when you get out there in the real world, maybe 5 years down the road, the way the web works, maybe Flask is obsolete, Django's obsolete, Express kind of has staying power because it doesn't do anything. I can expand on that if anybody asks or wants me to. But it'll be the next new thing. It'll be the next shiny new library that everybody likes because it has a nice new way of adding paths. And everybody goes nuts over it. There's a blog article that gets a bunch of traction, and everybody switches over to that framework. You don't have to care because you know that framework's just doing the same thing you did on your homework. But if you skip the project, if you just use homework code on your project, you do miss some of that intentional design of the course. So there is this loophole. I've been open about it, that there is a loophole that you can just use homework code and avoid reports. But that's not the intention. That's avoiding some of the learning experience of the course. It's just that loophole exists, so I'm open about it because a lot of teams will take advantage of that. So I want to make sure everybody knows that it does exist, so you don't feel cheated when I say, oh yeah, at the end of the semester, by the way, you could have just used homework code. Technically, the way I wrote up the document, you can do that. So I was open about that loophole existing, but it is a loophole. So the question that's been coming up is, this is kind of painful. Homework 4 is not due till next Friday, and then we got to do the project in a week. Yeah, but I don't want you taking that route anyway. I know most of you are. We're doing the report checkpoint. We'll get the feedback out tonight or tomorrow morning. It's just like a homework. The deadline was a week ago, so a 1-week grading deadline. And most of the class, the majority of the class, the majority of the teams are not using libraries and reports, which, it's fine. That's a design flaw that I have, and you're welcome to exploit that loophole. Just don't complain to me when you have to do the project in a week, because it's not my problem. It's not what I want you doing anyway. Yeah, question?
So in homework 4 especially, frameworks, I was looking at least Flask, but the authentication isn't really different than what we were doing in homework. Mm-hmm. So I found that to be one of those things, one of those assignments was kind of doing the homework code is basically doing it on your own. So yeah. Kind of better in a way.
Yeah, and when you're making decisions like that, I'd argue that you're learning a lot. Those are nice, informed decisions. Do I even need this library is a big thing that you'll do out there in industry as well. When I say using homework code, I mean the majority of teams are not using any frameworks at all. 0 reports, 0 frameworks. They're just taking, whoever got the most points from homeworks 1 through 4 and got all their features working, they're taking that as a starting point after homework 4 is due, and then adding DMs, user lists, and then they're calling it a day. That's what a lot of teams are doing. And the loophole is there because the homework, the homework expanded a bit. Like we do a lot more on the homework than we did the first semester when I designed this. So the homework kind of grew up until like almost what the project is asking you to do, which is what makes that loophole really exploitable. It really is, if you're trying to just get through the course with a good grade, it really is a good loophole. I understand why so many of you are taking it. It's pretty lucrative. But that's something I got to fix for next semester. I got ideas, like that loophole won't exist next semester. I just didn't have a good way to answer it over the winter break when I was revising for this semester. So it's fine if you take it. I'm not, I don't care. Just don't complain to me about the issues with that. If you're exploiting a loophole and the loophole turns out to not be that easy to exploit, yeah, it's a loophole. It's not, there's no design, like I didn't look at the course and design for that loophole at all. It just was a mistake on my side. So it ends up being pretty hard. I'm not going to rearrange the deadlines to make the loophole easier. From my perspective, hopefully you're understanding my perspective on that. That seems ridiculous to me. Like I'm not going to rearrange the course for a loophole. But I gotta get chat open. So the TLDR, I'm not mad at you for using the loophole. I don't care. I mean, at some level I do, but I'm not. It's a my problem, not your problem kind of thing. But don't complain to me about the loophole. My brain. One of these apps is the right one. Good morning. Could we use any of the UB photos for a class project, right? Wait, what? I don't even know what that means. Like from any of the UB photos, like take them from the UB website. Oh, I gotta not do that. Take them from the UB website. I don't know. I don't know if they reserve the copyright. Like, I won't care. And they're not gonna come after you, so. Like, unless you're using it for commercial purposes, like, nobody cares about copyright. It's when you start selling things, that's when it matters. UB is gonna send you a cease and desist on your 312 project because you used a picture. No, I don't care. All right, so I got a Piazza post that I posted. You can go check that one out for the eval incentives. I've been telling some of you this as we go through the semester, but it's time to announce it because evals are open as of today, as of this morning. The evals, I'll shorten the speech, but the feedback's important. I take the feedback seriously, all that stuff, all that good stuff. Lost my train of thought. But the only feedback I get before the end of the evals, or before the end of the semester, is the percentage of how many of you have filled it out. That's the only number I get. So my incentive, I want you to incentivize you to give this feedback. So my incentive has to be based on that percentage. I can't give an incentive just to the students who filled it out, as much as that would make things a lot easier. I can only give the incentive based on the percentage of the response rate. So the incentive is, and even after, so I can't see anything except that response rate until final grades are due. And then after final grades are due, it's still fully anonymous. So there's no repercussions, no matter what you put on there, unless you sign it with your name, I guess. I can find out who you are. There still won't be repercussions, but I might follow up with open up a dialogue with you because I want your feedback and I want to discuss it. So one crazy thing about the feedback, like I want to have a dialogue with the feedback, but it's just one way. I can't really, unless I make a Piazza post, but who's checking Piazza after the course? Anyway, it's still anonymous after that. So there can't be an effect on your grade because I have to submit grades before I can see this stuff, and it's fully anonymous. So my incentives are 40% drop one homework objective and one lecture question, 60% 2 objectives and 2 lecture questions, 80% 3 objectives and 3 lecture questions. So them dropping objectives does get pretty hefty. It's a pretty, it can significantly improve some of your grades, especially if you got a few zeros in there. If you got 3 zeros on 3 objectives throughout the semester and you get them all dropped, big improvement on your grade. This does come up with a question. So I usually compute homework grades as just averaging all the objectives and treating it as one 20 objective homework. That's the same exact number as computing all your homework averages and averaging them together. Is it actually, even without drops? I never had to compute that because I never actually computed that. But now with drops, there certainly is a question of which way should I compute averages. If I do drops, compute 4 homework grades and then average those 4 homework grades together, you can get a different score than if I average up, say we drop 2 and I average your 18 remaining objectives. There can be some ambiguity there, and in different cases, one or the other might improve your grade more. So when we have these drops, the drops and the way that your average is computed will be chosen to maximize your score. So if there's any ambiguity there, if you can choose any set of drops and choose one of those 2 ways of computing your average, whatever one maximizes your score, if that's not the one that generated your final grade, you got a valid complaint. You can say, hey, Jesse, if you drop these 2 and average this way, I actually get a B, but you gave me a B minus. I'm giving you that B. Now, I'll go through, nobody should have to do that because I'll be careful about computing all these and getting your max anyway. But if that does happen, you have a valid excuse. I'll choose the one that maximizes your score. That'll be automatic. You don't have to let me know unless I make a mistake. In that rare case where I make a mistake, I haven't yet in a few semesters. So, all right, one more. Oh, crap. 15 minutes of announcements. So one more thing. Let me post this. We have review next week, and I don't have anything planned. It'll just be whatever you decide. So today, I should be able to get through. If I don't get through everything I want to do today, that'll spill over to Monday. But anything you want to see, for those of you familiar with what I do in 116, I do this in 116 each semester with review week, but I'll do whatever you want to see. So vote, go to this Piazza post, make your suggestions, and then vote, whatever it's called on Piazza. I always forget this. I can't scroll down. Good comment, I think. Do that to do the voting, and then whatever the top topics are, however many, I'll start, sort in decreasing order of number of votes, and however many I get through in a week, that's what we do that week. So that's my plan. I do always reserve the right to veto anything that's not within reason. I have a very high tolerance for what I'll get up here and talk about, so I've never had to veto anything before. Take that as a challenge, if you will, to get something out there that I'll veto. But if y'all want to see something, why wouldn't I do it? Unless it's just, I don't know. I can't even think of something that I'd actually veto. So maybe you'll be able to come up with one. In 116, they haven't yet, but 312, I have some confidence you'll get something I might have to veto. So I can't scroll down because I have the instructor view. It'll dox somebody if they post it anonymously. Or else I'd scroll down and check that one out. Yeah, game week. I would do game week. If it gets enough traction. So there's always the fear of, I do this post and there are 2 suggestions and one of them has 1 upvote. That can happen too. And then I'm subject to 2 students who want to see something and then nobody else cares. By the way, I don't care what's covered is also a valid thing to suggest. Or we could just have a week off because I ain't going to show up anyway is a valid suggestion. Just letting you know, just throwing that out there. Oh, I actually do have another thing to announce. I got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The deadline to sign up for presentations, if you had this loaded for a while, refresh like I just did. Sign up for a presentation time. Most teams already have done this, so if you haven't signed up for a presentation time, the slots are getting pretty slim. Most of the remaining slots are on Monday, the first Monday. The presentations, I said this on Piazza earlier, I gotta say this for everybody, just to make sure everybody knows this. Some of these presentation times are before the project deadline. So WTF, what do we do? Whatever you cover, how do I want to word that? Well, as long as you cover each of the 5 requirements, I haven't talked about the presentation at all. Let's just do that. So the presentation has 3 parts that I'm looking for. 1, demo all 5 of the requirements. You have 5 requirements for your project. I want to see them. Show them off in your presentation. If all 5 of them are not working, at least mention all 5 of them. I want to know the status of all 5 of them. If you come in Monday and you say, well, we're using homework code and homework 4 was just due, so we really don't have anything working, at least talk about each of the 5 and how it's going to work in the final product. Talk to me about, just talk to me about all 5 required features. If they're not working, talk about them. I'm looking, when I'm grading these, I'm going to grade them as you're giving the presentation, and I'm checking off each of the 5 things. Did they mention authentication? Did they mention DNs? Did they demo it or mention it, et cetera? You get all 5 of them at least mentioned, good. If all 5 of them work, it's still the same thing. Presentation is graded separately from your project. We're going to grade the functionality of those 5 requirements when we grade your projects. I'm not going to hit you twice and hit you on the presentation as well. That's not really fair. Even if your project's a complete broken mess, you can still get full credit on the presentation. And that's true for, I mentioned the Monday. That's true for the final exam time too. If you're presenting during the final exam time, which is after the project deadline and things still aren't working, you can still get full credit on the presentation. It's not exclusive to people presenting, teams presenting that last week of classes. Software architecture. This is basically your reports section. Talk to me about what libraries you used for these features. This doesn't have to be in any great detail, but talk to me about what libraries you used. Hey, we used Flask for this, and give a brief, not report level, bless you, not report level depth, but a brief explanation of how Flask works. Flask uses the WorkZug library, and that's what handles the TCP connections. And WorkZug uses the internal Python stuff. Something at a higher level than the reports, because if you cover the reports, your presentation is going to be forever long. But mention the architecture of each of them. If you're using the loophole of homework code, say, we used homework code, so there's nothing to talk about here. But you do have to mention that, because I'm grading this as 3 separate sections. If you don't talk about software architecture at all, I'm not just going to assume you used homework code. I want to know for a fact we used homework code. That also helps when grading your projects. If you have a presentation before your projects are graded, I'm marking that down and saying, oh, they used homework code, and then I know we can do a quick check for reports and not expect anything, and just verify that you used homework code. But you have to mention this. And then finally, reflection. This is my favorite part. I like this part of the presentations. If you could talk to your former selves at the beginning of the semester, your team, when you first got together and were starting to work on the project, what would you tell yourselves if you could go back in time to that moment? What would you tell yourselves? What would you do to give a heads up? And I like this because I use what you say here. I take all of these. I take diligent notes when you're giving the reflection part especially, and distill that into advice for the next semester. So like last semester, most students used the homework code. So this semester I was up front and said, hey, there is a loophole. I'm not thrilled about it. Apparently I didn't communicate too well that I'm not thrilled about it. That is a loophole. But that there is this loophole that you can use homework code, and it exists. And it's there. Other feedback that I got in earlier semesters is now just part of the project. Like giving you the sample app. I didn't used to do that, but so much of the reflection was all about finding the easiest way to fulfill the 5 requirements. So now these days, starting last semester, I give that sample app and say, look, here's the easiest way to fulfill the 5 requirements. If you just do this, if you're just looking to get through this project, here's what you build. So that came from these reflections. And next semester, taking your reflections, hopefully I'll have more advice and better things and things to tell the next semester. So those are the 3 things. So when I'm grading, did you demo or talk about all 5 requirements? Did you talk about the software architecture or just mention that you use homework code? And did you give the, reflection for your past selves? Presentation should be 8 to 10 minutes. I don't have a strict time requirement, but once it gets, no, I don't really do that in this class, do I? It's more of a 442 thing. And finally, you don't all have to talk. This isn't really a course about presentations, but I do want you getting a presentation in there. Maybe this will change in future semesters, but not everybody has to talk, but you do all have to be present. If you're not present for your team's presentation, it's a 0 for you, and then whoever does show up gets whatever the team score is for that presentation. But if one person wants to talk and give the entire presentation, I'm fine with that. It's just something I'm not going to fight, because I always get that question, and I don't know, how much do I care in 312 about that? In 442, I care a lot, because that's a bigger portion of the class, but be there, but you don't have to talk. All right, any questions about any of that? This is kind of like the last thing I really have to talk about 312. Yes? Oh, good question. Forget what I decided last year and if I regretted it or not. I think, let me I hate answering this one, because I want to make you be there for all of them. If you're not presenting on that day, you don't have to be there at all. That much I know. I know I want to decide that way. If you're presenting that day, like, I don't want to hold you hostage for the whole final exam time. By the way, I changed the final exam time, so we don't have to wake up at 8. We do get to sleep until 9 if you're that first team. I'm going to say, I'll say no, you don't have to be there for all of the presentations on that day, just because I don't feel like enforcing it, and anybody who's not here, I don't feel like spreading the word and everything. But if your intention is to show up at your scheduled time, that's not necessarily going to be the time that you present. So, for example, we'll have 4 presentations on each of these lecture days. If the first 3 presentations each take 5 minutes, and you sign up for the 10:30 time slot, like, you might actually be presenting at 10:15. And if there's no team there ready to present, I might just leave, and it might just be a 0, because you weren't there and you weren't ready. So I will enforce that for sure, because I will reserve that anyway. You know, I'll stay for a few minutes. I'm not cruel like that. But if you're trying to cut down your day by half an hour, I'm not going to have all that much sympathy for that. But I also don't want to hold you hostage for 2 hours during the final exam time. But especially if you have the last slot on final exam day and all the presentations before you just go really quick, because a lot of teams don't use 8 to 10 minutes. You know, I'm not just going to sit there for an hour waiting. So it depends on the situation, but my answer will be no, but with that caution. With that caution, that your presentation time is not necessarily your presentation time, the time you signed up for. I'm not going to waste my time just waiting around an hour for a team, because I got better things to do. Or rather, I reserve the right. I might. It depends what mood I'm in. If I'm in a good mood at the final exam and I'm settled in and I'm checking email on my laptop in the back, you know, I might just sit in this room by myself for a while and wait for you. But I reserve the right to just walk away. I used to require every presentation in 442. It's pointless, though. I could end up getting sidetracked too far on this one. Yeah, I used to do something to that effect, like extra lecture credit, question credit for people who come to the presentations, except I required it for 442. Like, you had to show up, and it was lecture activities in 442 to rate each of the presentations and fill out a form to give feedback on them, to them. I haven't done that in a long time. Do we have a final exam in this class? It's timely to ask that question. No, it's the final exam time is presentations. Is reserved for presentations. That's why it says project presentations. All right, but let's get on with this. I spent way too much time. So this will definitely spill over to Monday. Actually, I mean, it's possible that it won't. But let's talk about deploying an app. I'm going to deploy CSE312.com because why not? So my goal is to take a repo of code. This could be your homework code or whatever. I'm just going to pick this repo because I know when I deploy it, it's going to run. Everything's going to work right because I have it deployed already. And deploy this on a domain with HTTPS and everything working exactly the way we want it to. So for this, the first thing I want to do just to make sure it propagates in time, is go to Google Domains, where I should be logged in, and I'm not logged in. Am I logged in? I am logged in. And I can see all my domains, and I want to buy a new domain. So this is your chance to choose some silly name that I'm going to buy. So let's table that so you can get some suggestions in there, or else I'll just pick the idea. And I also want to go to my DigitalOcean account. So I like DigitalOcean. I'm not sponsored or anything by them. So go out there and choose what you will. If you don't like DigitalOcean, just don't use them. But I like DigitalOcean because what they do, you give them money, and they give you a virtual machine with a static IP address that you can SSH into, and you have root access. So it's just like opening the terminal on your machine. It's the same idea. You open up the terminal, and you just have all the access. I like that because I can do whatever I want to do. So I'm going to use, hopefully this is my account. Sent verification code to my email. Oh, piss. My Yahoo mail, which is not an email address I use anymore. So I'm going to log into DigitalOcean. They have plans as low as $5 a month. So if you do want to do this, you can get a droplet. And I want to get my IP address because I always forget what my IP address is. And then once I get this droplet, which is what they call their servers, their virtual servers. I'm sure they're virtualized, but when they call them droplets, they can abstract away the details. And then SSH into it as root. And I have my full Ubuntu machine. This is running on a server somewhere in New York City, managed by DigitalOcean. And I have root access. I'm logged in as root, and I can do whatever I want on this server. I have a server with a static IP address that's under my control. I have sudo access. More than that, I have root access. And I can just do whatever I want. This is why I like DigitalOcean, because I'm comfortable in the command line, and it just lets me get to the command line and do whatever I want. I can install software, I can run Docker Compose, I can do whatever I want here. So I like that. You can use other things like AWS and Heroku and things like that, both which have free tiers, but you are subject to their architecture. You can't have full access. You send them your code, and then they handle your code and do whatever they will with it. I don't mean it that way, like in a privacy way, but you have to comply to their interfaces. You have to submit a project in the right format, in the right structure, and it can be a little tougher to work with. I just don't feel like messing around with that. JesseLand.day. Jesse always be watching. Jesse is always be watching. Jesse is always be watching has some votes. Jesse is always be watch Jesse is always BQ watching.com. Oh, piss. Oh, I actually want that in my clipboard, though. I want both in my clipboard. All right. Let's spend $12. Auto renew is off. Oh, yeah, that's already available on the left. Oh, actually, I did take it down. Well, I doxed myself. Congratulations. All right, and now I own this domain name. Site can't be reached. Oh, man. So I own this domain name, but what we need to do is set up the DNS. So right now I own a domain name, like GoMe, big deal. But what I want is to connect this domain name to my DigitalOcean server. So I want any request for this domain name to go to my DigitalOcean server. So I'm going to say, hey, Google, you get a request for this, like update all your DNS and update the other DNS servers to say that that domain name is associated with this IP address. So when people do a DNS lookup for my IP address, that they're going to get my IP address for my server. So now it can take a while to propagate the DNS, which is why I want to do that step earlier rather than later. But eventually, we're going to start seeing an Nginx error instead of site can't be reached error. And Chrome, it might work a bit faster, just because it's Google. Hey, and there's my Nginx error. So Google's DNS and Chrome, it's just going to work faster. But this is Chromium-based, so it's probably going to be here too. But it might take a little while on Firefox. There we go. There's my Nginx. So this is making it to my server through this domain name, but it's hitting my Nginx, and Nginx doesn't know what to do with it. And actually, we are going to get this done by the end of the lecture. So what I need to do, well, first let's clone the repo. Let's get this thing running. It's probably called CSE 312, so let me go into a separate directory. Did anyone catch that I didn't have to type in my password to SSH in here? You all probably know about that already by this time anyway. Woof.com there's no way that's available. There's no chance that that's available. All right, so I have my code. I'm going to look into my Pico for the win. My Docker Compose file, and I want to change the port because 8312 is already taken by the actual 312.com website. So let's change this to 8777. We'll go for lucky today. I'm going to Docker Compose up-d. The -d runs it in the background, so I'm going to get my terminal back. I don't want my terminal held hostage by Docker Compose. So I'm going to run this app, and it should be working. Now, if I go to the internet, and I go to this domain name, and I go to 8777.com, I can access this directly. That domain name is my IP address effectively after the DNS lookup. And if I go to port 87777, I'm saying too many sevens there, ain't I? 8777, then I'll get to my site and it works. I could also replace my domain name with my IP address directly. That would also work, of course. So I'm live, I'm on the internet, and everything's great. But I don't want to say, hey, you want to visit me, go to jesseisalwaysbewatching.com, because the domain name isn't long enough already, 8777. I don't want to have to tell people that. So we want this running on port 80. For that, we want to go to our Nginx configuration. Now, I'm not using the confd stuff. I'm using sites enabled because I have a different configuration file for each one of my apps. I'm going to copy cc312.com, do jesseIsAlwaysBeWatching.com, and then take a look at the configuration. Now, a lot of this I have to remove because it's valid for the other, oh goodness, the other server. This is fine. Listen, 80. So I'm going to say whenever you get a request for the domain, if I can spell my own name, jesseIsAlwaysBeWatching.com. jesseIsAlwaysBeWatching. And get rid of all this. So I'm going to set up the configuration the way we did the first time we did it in lecture on Wednesday. I'm listening on port 80, and if Nginx gets a request on port 80 for this domain name, then they're going to forward it to the port for my app. I almost cheated by forwarding it to the other one, to 8777. So I'm going to forward it to that port. You just saw that forwarding to 8312 if the request is for the domain cc312.com. And if we look at some of these other ones, I guess 442, you can guess what the port is for that. Forward it to port 8442 if the request is for cc442.com. So this is going to allow me to have one Nginx instance, which is going to route, depending on domain name, to my different apps. And then I have Docker running all my apps. Some of them are down right now, but towers on jessehartloff.com, 8442 for 442.com, 777, the one we just did, 116 for the 116 website, 115 for the 115, which is just a redirect, which I don't even think redirects to anything right now. And where, I forgot it does this. So that actually killed, so cc312.com is down right now because this instance right here replaced the cc312.com instance because it's the same containers. It reuses the containers. I thought it would create new containers off of the same image. I forget that it does that because it says, hey, this is the same thing you already have running. So cc312 will be down during this lecture. Presumably everybody who cares is here right now anyway. So that gives us, as soon as I always forget this command, reload, I think, nginx-s reload is going to reload my Nginx configuration, and now I should be able to get rid of this port number, and I'm hosted on port 80, and then Nginx is routing to the proper server based on that domain name, and then forwarding to a different port number. Yeah, 312 should be down right now. 442 is? Was that always down, or did you just check during this lecture? Because that might have just been down already. Oh, no, it isn't. Unless I got cached. This might just be in cache for me. No. If that's still not working for you, I want to know about though, because I might have something I have to fix. And the last thing we need. Man, this used to take me a whole lecture. If I'm going too fast and you want me to explain stuff, I can. I might just be blitzing through this too fast. But, yeah.
How does Nginx know what host you're trying to reach?
That's a good question. I've wondered that myself. I think it's reading the headers. I don't know where else it would get that information other than the headers. So when you make a request, I never looked into it specifically. So when you make a request, you're going to send us host header. I assume it's reading that header to do the redirects, to do the routing. Because I've thought this before, because like Nginx, my Nginx has no idea that a DNS lookup happened. So it wouldn't have that information at all. It just gets a request for the IP address, and then with the host header, I think that's the only way it could do it. But it's something I've been meaning to look up to see exactly if that is the way. But I can't think of another way it would. Yeah, just besides like magic. I don't know. Let's get dark theme going. So there's one more thing we need. This is not secure. We don't like this. There's no cert at all. So let's go to our friend certbot. Any other questions, by the way? Because I must be going through this fast. This used to take like lecture and a half, I think, the first time I did it. Maybe I did a lot of Git also the first time I did it, though.
So if you wanted to update DigitalOcean with a updated repo, we can do that.
If I wanted to...
We make changes on
Oh,
repo.
yeah, so I can demo that, actually. So if I go to 312.com, my code, and what change do we want to make to 312.com? Well, I'm going to take it down, though, unfortunately, because I got to get back to 312.com, so I have to switch it back to that. What week are we in? 13, right? It's fall recess this week, right? Okay, there we go. So I make a change to my repo. I'm going to push to that repo. And then I'm going to go to my server. Let's table this one just because I want to finish what I'm doing here. Right? No, I don't even have to be in this directory. No, I do want to be in this directory. Let me finish what I'm doing here, and then I'll circle back to that. But I'll go into the directory, pull, and then rebuild the container, is the TLDR of it. So I'm going to certbot, which is a free service, which is going to give us signed certificates. And not only is it free, but it's going to give us an automated way to do these certs super easy, as long as everything goes right. I'm going to choose Nginx because I'm using Nginx, Ubuntu 20 because I'm using Ubuntu 20. And it's going to give me some steps to install certbot. I already have certbot installed. So I'm going to do certbot Nginx. I'm going to say, hey, certbot, I'm running Nginx, and I would like a certificate, please. I'm going to run this command. It's going to read all of my domain names that I have and ask me, hey, which domain are you talking about? I'm talking about, and it read my configuration to find that we just added that new site. I'm talking about jesseIsAlwaysBeWatching.com. And what it's doing right now is the script is generating random data and hosting it on my servers, changing my Nginx configuration and hosting random values on my server. And then the script is telling the certbot server to request those random values using the domain name. If those random values match, then I must have run this script on a server that controls that domain name. And it verifies that I'm the owner of that domain because it got those random values that they call challenges. All the challenges pass, and now it's like, okay, would you like to redirect HTTP to HTTPS? I'm going to say yes, redirect that stuff. And if I look at my configuration, I can see that all that manage my certbot stuff is that we saw on the other configurations. All of that stuff was just added. All I said was listen on port 80 on this domain name and do this stuff forward to port 87s. And then certbot added the cert. It installed these certs. It set up some configuration. It's listening on port 443. And then it's always going to redirect to HTTPS if I get a request for HTTP on port 80. And it just does it all for me. Oh man, there's no stuff. I don't think it reloads Nginx for me, so I'm just going to do it to be sure. And when I go here, I'm going to refresh. It did redirect to HTTPS. I'm just going to try it a few more times. Work for me. Somehow I went back to 312. But that ties into our other demo. We can finish this one up. Lecture. So if I want to get those new changes, I'm going to git pull. And then docker compose up -d build to get those new changes in the new Docker containers. And once Docker's done doing its thing, we should be at the conclusion of this. We have a valid cert signed by R3 and IG, that. Everything's fine, everything works. We have a deployed app, add a domain name with HTTPS and no security warnings, none of that stuff. So if you want to take anything you've learned in this class and deploy it, that's what you want to do. And we're at 10:50, so let's wrap it up with this. I wanted to make sure I mentioned all these. I think I did. Oh, the deadline for presentation is Wednesday. I think I mentioned that. I mentioned that Monday slots are about the only ones left, so I think I mentioned the deadline as part of that. And no lecture questions for the next 2 weeks. No lecture questions anymore. Not a trick question. But, like 5 students picked it's a trap on April 1st. I gave them credit for what it's worth.
This feels like wow, false.
Yeah. Which is not true. All right, and have a great weekend. I'll see at least some of you Monday. There's no lecture questions, so I'm sure it'll thin out.